Hey, here we are. Well, have I got a story, several stories actually, for you today? Um, Ian McLean is an acclaimed business leader who has operated across four continents and is the author of the book TJ's War, which we'll discuss in a bit. Earlier in his career, or careers, I should say, he was an officer and a pilot in the RAF. That's the Royal Air Force, if you're an American and don't know what that is, before running his own multi-million dollar or pound retail business. He then made quite the pivot, studying and specializing in AI, artificial intelligence, before it was all the rage to do so. And yet again, he made another pivot, helping consulting to transform and transition blue chip companies like Nissan, British Airways. His client list includes Boeing, Hilton and Marriott Hotels, Lufthansa, Volvo, the UK and Scottish governments, and on, a slew of other global enterprises. He's all over the place, folks, with a heck of a backstory to go along with it. His current company, which he founded in 2004, is called ICIFM, which is essentially the brand name for International Consultant Ian Fraser McLean. The book I mentioned, TJ's War, is his first book, in which the research took nearly 40 years to complete. He joins me now just south of London. Welcome to the program, Ian McLean.
Glad to be here. Nice to meet you, Mark.
Nice to meet you. Well, Ian, there's so many places I could start, and so we might bounce around a little bit. But after all those accolades I just mentioned, I want to first briefly ask you about something I read about you, and that's this: that you hitchhiked across the Sahara Desert during a 3-year sabbatical. That sounds like a scene from Lawrence of Arabia. We won't spend all of our time on this, but just quickly, how old were you? Where were you going? How was the experience? Any near death encounters like dehydration, heat stroke, or a desert pirate?
Wow. No desert pirates. I I came out of the RAF because I decided I didn't want to kill anyone, and
Good
clearly I
move.
was in the wrong organization for that to be the case. Ultimately, and I didn't really know what I was going to do myself. I was in my mid-20s or 24, I think, at this point, and I just decided, no, I don't know really who I am or where I'm going. So I decided to take some time out. And I had relations in South Africa. Some are still there. And I thought, I'll go and see them.
Hmm.
So I got a rucksack and a tent and a sleeping bag and the local radio station up in Inverness called Murrayfirth Radio. It's still going. I talked with Brian Anderson, the producer there, and he organized one of these special tape recorders with cassettes. And as I hitchhiked down through the UK and into France and into Spain, I would send tapes back of people. I would sort of interview people and talk to them and just say where I am and what I'm doing.
Hmm.
And he would make these up into little programs that would be broadcast. And then I went across, and I remember getting on the ferry to take me from Algeciras in the south of Spain to Africa. And
Hmm.
I was on the ferry and thinking, have I bitten off more than I can chew? I don't speak Arabic. I have
Yeah.
no idea what this country looks like. And I got into Morocco, and Morocco was poor. I actually went into Ceuta, which is a outpost on the north coast of Spain, north coast of Africa, which is still owned by Spain.
Hmm.
So I didn't actually get into Morocco until the next day,
Hmm.
and it was poor. And I
Yeah.
spent, I traveled down to Tetuan and across to Oujda, and then down into the desert to Figik. That's all going east. And I had to do that to be able to cross the border into Algeria because of a war that was pretty much going on in the western side of Morocco with the Polisario.
Hmm.
So anyway, I crossed into Algeria and got back north. And my intention was to get to Algiers and spend some time learning Arabic and then traveling south through Africa.
Hmm.
You know, I'm 24 years old. I must have been
Right.
pretty nuts, right? But it just seemed like something you could do. Uh, and I got to Algiers and I got an Algerian girlfriend for a while, and I learned some really good words.
I
Uh,
bet.
then I and then I headed south. Now I met some French travelers along the way. I think I first started hearing about what to do when I was in Paris on my way south. But when you say hitchhiking through the Sahara Desert, it's not quite as uh, random as that.
Exotic. Oh, okay. Yeah.
What happens is you'll get to small oases. There'll be a small village of a few houses, but there'll always be a truck going either north or south, maybe 2 or 3 trucks, and they'll park up. And in the morning, you'll negotiate with the driver, roughly 50 cents back in those days will get you to travel on the load on the back. And if you paid $1, you could sit in the cab. Either way, the driver would stop along the way and create a meal, and there may be 4 or 5 people on the back of the truck, and you'd all sit and have a meal. And he'd also have the water, a tank of water, and you take cups from that as you traveled along. So it wasn't quite as nuts as it sounds.
Yeah.
But it
Well,
took
it does still, but yeah.
it took 40 odd days to get down to Tamanrasset.
Mm,
And at Tamanrasset, that's still 200 miles from the border. And they said, you can't go any further south. Mali is shut because of a cholera outbreak.
mm.
Your best bet is to go back up to Algiers, as if it's next door, right? And
Right.
then just fly over the top to Cameroon. So I then headed back north.
Mm,
And that nearly killed me,
yeah.
because that was probably the second time. I think I nearly killed myself in the RAF. And then on the
Mm,
way back up from Algiers, from Tamanrasset, each time I'd arrive in that village, sometimes the villagers would be quite welcoming, and sometimes they'd be very wary.
yeah.
Or if I felt they were wary, I wouldn't give them any stress. I'd move out of the village by a couple of
Right.
miles, pitch my tent, and then come back in the morning.
Yeah.
This particular day, that's what I did. Sun went down about 4 o'clock in the morning. There's this train,
Mm,
just the sign of a train coming at you.
mm.
And it was a sandstorm. And as soon as it hit the tent, it flattened the tent. I mean, it was massive. And for the next 5 hours, I'm kind of wading around inside the tent to sort of bring myself back up to the surface of the sand.
Mm.
And then the sandstorm disappears, just like it started, complete silence. I get out of the tent, and where the road was, and it wasn't a road, it's a sort of sand track. There was just sand. Everything was
It's
different.
covered.
Sand
Yeah.
had been created where there weren't any before, and
Yeah.
I then
But,
I didn't know where the village was, and I really didn't have a lot of water because I was relying on the drivers for water most of the time. So I become relaxed and not worried too much about water. So I walked out in a straight line from the tent as far as I could see, and then I made a massive circle around it, blazing hot sun, and couldn't see the village anywhere.
wow.
So I then went back to the tent, re-erected it, and decided to sit there, because the guys who drive these trucks, they're Tuaregs. They know the whole thing by instinct, and I was pretty sure that eventually one of them would come past. Well,
Mm,
no truck came past. The whole day I waited, no truck came past. And I got myself very badly sunburnt by walking around in this big circle. So by the evening time, it's beginning to hurt. It's beginning to really hurt. And I was sitting in the tent, and by about midnight, I couldn't actually move. I found a
uh,
position where
had,
I could stay without pain, and I then sort of began to climb up in that position.
mm,
And about, I don't know, 6 o'clock in the morning, my tongue's swollen inside my mouth, my whole face is swollen, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to die.
mm.
And eventually I got comfortable with that, and I thought, well, that's okay, you know. Somehow I just thought that's okay. And about 5 o'clock that night, a truck just happened to come past, and the great thing is, he jumped out of the cab and looked inside the tent because I couldn't move.
Wow. Yeah, that is good. That's lucky.
And he dragged me into the truck, got me to this village. This wonderful woman, massive woman, took me inside, and for the next couple of days, doused me in water with cotton wool with water in it to get my skin rehydrated.
Wow. That's crazy. There's,
And
yeah. There must be something about 24 that I actually also took the boat from the south of Spain over to Tangier, Morocco when I was 24. I didn't have quite I had a pretty decent adventure. I went to Marrakesh and Casablanca, and but yeah, Morocco was still poor when I was 24 as well. And but yeah, I don't know. Something about when you're 24, you're just up for any kind of adventure, I suppose.
yeah,
Well,
I look back at it now. My mother is still alive, and I just said, what was I doing to her? I was, um,
Same here. Well, I mean, we could have a whole episode on that, but let's get into some other stuff here. Uh, Over 4 decades of your career life, I won't ask you what all you've learned, of course. That's a whole series, but rather, what is the biggest nugget of wisdom that perhaps you didn't realize when you set out in business, presumably in your early 20s, I guess. If you had to say there's a preeminent value or a critical starting point, whether that's in building a business or in one's personal life, what's at core of importance and significance? I know you said on another program that surround yourself with good people is important. Is that the or one of the core elements of success in life?
It is. It absolutely is. I was told that in a training course by somebody who's my age now when I was 25, 26. And I've kept it in my head, and it's always made very good sense.
Hmm.
I think possibly the biggest nugget for me beyond that is in the RAF. It's a very structured organization, and you tend to believe that the people who are senior to you in rank know more than you do. You know,
Yeah.
and you're kind of encouraged to believe that. I use courage in inverted commas there, and it takes time. It takes time to think for yourself, and I think that period of time when I did go off into the desert and other places, that was part of that restructuring that went on inside my head.
Mm.
And I've
That
come to realize
they don't necessarily know more than you do, even though they're
yeah,
right.
well,
Yeah.
that I didn't quite appreciate, but I began to gain more self-worth
Mm.
during that time. And what I've discovered, I'm not sure exactly when I picked this up, but what I've found is that nobody really knows more than you do, and the higher up the ranks these people are, the more they are pretending that they know. And there's
That's
this
the skill set that they've learned is how to pretend that they know.
that is the skill set,
Yeah.
and some of them are better than others. And the problem is that these layers, they tend to believe them. I'm generalizing. Some do and some don't.
Mm.
But the danger is that they begin to believe their own publicity,
Yeah.
and they sort of wind up going up their own backside, really.
Yeah.
And and
It,
and this happens to the people at the top, and it makes them more and more useless. And I was really surprised at just how useless a lot of people who are regarded as senior leaders are.
yeah. It's
Uh,
interesting you bring this up because it comes out right away in the book. I mean, we'll transition to the book now. In the first chapter, TJ or John, you're it's this is your father. It's about your father, right? And I think they're in Norway on top of a mountain, and there's like a young captain or a lieutenant or something who's kind of, kind of knows or is acting like he knows it all because he's the CO, the commanding officer. But there's kind of this old sergeant that really has the wisdom there, or whatever. So it's interesting that you mentioned this in real life because it comes out in your book as well.
that's
Uh,
cool. I didn't spot that transition.
yeah. I don't. Yeah, I didn't know if that was intentional or what, but
No, it's good.
so let's talk about the book. It's dedicated to, as I mentioned, dedicated to, and is about your father, TJ Thomas John McLean. He's referred to a lot in the beginning simply as John, and later more as TJ. But let me say first, seriously, the book is beautifully written, and what I mean by that is it reads like a novel, not a biography. There's very vivid imagery in the prose. It's written almost poetically or romantically in the Ernest Hemingway sense of romanticism, like Farewell to Arms. Yet at the beginning of each chapter, there is a historical setting that sets the scene as to what was happening. So, for example, at the beginning of chapter 3, Hitler's invaded Poland in 1939. You get a sense of what's happening historically as you're reading about this personal story of TJ's. So, in so doing, while you've dramatized the account of TJ's experience during World War II, it's also a story about a generation, right? Can you talk more about that, about what people might learn, not only about your father, but about the people of his generation, all gathered in Europe from across Earth to fight this horribly violent global war?
Wow. I'm just very happy with what you've just said. Thank you very much. Me and Ernest Hemingway in the same sentence. I'm going to record that.
It's recorded. Don't worry. It's going to be made public.
No, but I'm going to somehow blazon that somewhere. But he's one of my big heroes. I've read just about everything he's ever written. And
look, I mean, this is an audio program that most people are just going to hear this, but some people are going to see it. I've got him. You can't see because it's a small picture, but that one I'm pointing to there, that's Hemingway holding up a big fish he caught. So anyway, he's an inspiration for me as well. Anyway, go ahead.
Oh wow, we've got a lot to talk about.
I guess so.
So yeah, because my father died when I was 10. All I really felt was relief. Because it's really tough being the kid of an alcoholic, and not because my father beat me up or anything like that. It was never abusive inside the house. That wasn't his style, but he would get so drunk that he'd be found in the gutter and be brought home with vomit down his jacket and so on. And if you go to school and the other kids know that, they can make your life pretty miserable.
Yeah.
And the teachers give up on you and so on. So I felt relief when he died at age 10. And I didn't change from that position really until I came across a photograph. And even then, it took a while. But I came across a photograph when I was 15, which showed three men, one of which was a Nazi prisoner, and the other chap was a guy in a uniform I didn't realize was Norwegian until much later. And the third guy was a British Army officer. And I said to my mother, "Why have you got this photograph?" And she said, "Well, that's your father." And I said, "Which one?" Because it didn't look anything like the man I remembered. And it took me quite a while to see the features that were in common between the photograph and the man I remembered.
Yeah.
He'd become very bloated, become gray-haired. He'd become his face had lost all its energy, and so I realized I had no idea who this man was. And so I then spent 40 years, between 30 and 40 years, going out and about a week a year roughly, talking to people who'd worked with him or knew him, or I went to the places that he'd been to, and I realized that I had no idea what he'd gone through.
Yeah.
And I think for anybody born after 1945, that's true. I think unless you've really had a good deep chat discussion with people about what they went through in the Second World War,
it's no idea.
And even now, I've written all this from the comfort of a desk.
Right.
These people lived it.
How much literary license did you take in? I mean, I wanted, you sort of answered some of my follow-up questions that I had intended to ask, which would be, how did you even gather information about your father? He died right before your 11th birthday, right? And how did you even gather this information? But you mentioned in interviews and putting together, learning who your father was before he was the version you saw him as you know, as an alcoholic in his later years, and how did you put the information together, and how much literary lessons did you take when writing the book about his experiences? I mean, is it fiction? Does fiction and nonfiction intertwine here, or is it purely biographical?
It's creative nonfiction is what it's called.
Okay.
So
that's good.
I've kind of answered how I got the information. These things just grew and grew, and sometimes I find, for example, if you go onto the TJ's War website, there's a newspaper clip on there. I didn't find that newspaper clip until 10 years ago.
Oh wow.
So the bits came out of the woodwork all over the place, but talking to people, and most of them didn't want to talk. And one of the reasons that they eventually did open up was that here was a man who, as a 10-year-old boy, lost his father, and he's just wanting to know who he is. I didn't go do this research for a book. I simply did the research to find out who my father was.
Right.
As I dug, there were more questions than answers most of the time.
Well, I'm glad, yeah.
But I have to correct you on what you just said, that he became an alcoholic in his later years. No, uh, he became an alcoholic by the time he was about 22.
Oh, okay.
This is what the war, I mean,
What it did to him.
what's coming back with a number of the reviews that we're seeing from the book and for people to get in touch with me directly is this is such a common experience
Mm,
that the men who came back, the men and women who came back from the Second World War and have come back from other wars since, I don't think very much has changed.
right.
They're so damaged by what they're experiencing and what they're doing, especially what they're doing,
Mm,
that they need something to be able to cope with that. And for a
yeah.
lot of them, it's alcohol, but a lot of them, it's drugs, and the others just they can't live with themselves, and they go and live in the streets and then kill themselves or whatever. It's we just don't understand the damage we're putting our best people to
Yeah.
get into the army, the name of the RAF right now in the UK, and it's the same in America. You've got to be the best of the best.
Yeah.
So we're taking the best of our kids
And
and
sending them off
destroying
to,
them.
yeah, sending them off to war. Um, well, we're running a little low on time. I have to ask before we do run out. Your father is quite possibly, even likely, one of the agents Ian Fleming had in mind when he wrote the James Bond character in his series of books. Um, your father and Ian Fleming, operated in MI6 at the same time, often in the same arenas, including London, Anzio, Italy, and in Bermuda, right? It,
Yep.
in the original Ian Fleming novels, have you ever gotten a sense of what you might be reading was about your father?
Um, no, not really. But I need to go back and read them again. Um, I think I think the closest you get to it is with Skyfall, where he reveals that James Bond is a Highlander or came from the Highlands,
Mm,
but he has him as an orphan,
mm.
um, whereas TJ was definitely not an orphan. I absolutely do not think that James Bond is based on one person.
Right. Yeah. I, I don't
But
think so either. Right.
but Bill Stevenson, who ran, it was called the Man, the Intrepid was his code name, based in Bermuda. There's a very strong likelihood that he's another character who was James Bond was based on. His house was called Goldeneye, and Ian Fleming used to stay there. And then when he set up his own house in Barbados, he called that Goldeneye. So there was a
Mm,
direct link between those two men.
right.
But Bill Stevenson did not get up to some of the field work that you see in James Bond and you see in TJ.
Mm. It's fascinating. What do you, other than a good story, what, which it certainly is, what do you hope people gain from reading TJ's War? I mean, maybe we talked about some insight into that generation, but is what other life lesson is in there in the book?
Uh, we've got to stop war. I kind of jokingly say that this is my attempt for world peace, but I don't understand war.
Yeah, me
I
either.
feel that war is created by the decisions and actions of just a handful of people around
It
the world.
is. Yeah. Bill Burr,
And
there's a comedian, American comedian named Bill Burr, and he makes a joke. I can't do it justice, so it's not going to be funny. But he essentially says that that everybody should just stop. Like all the soldiers should just stop and walk away and just go home, and just let all the crusty old rich politicians figure out what they're going to do when they don't have any soldiers to fight these wars. But
completely, I completely agree with that.
yeah,
I just think it's I'll put down my gun if you put down yours,
right.
and that's the problem.
Yeah,
But it's desperately sad. So what I'd like people to take away from this is the madness of it all. And
yeah,
towards the end of the book, I've got TJ going, who won?
yeah,
Was it the king? Was it Churchill? Because I didn't win anything.
right.
All we've done is killed enough people until we're satisfied. It's like a bloodlust.
And the people who survived are damaged from
Absolutely.
the experience. Um, in each episode, I try to do a small, like, 5-minute segment called 5 Minutes Zen. Doesn't have to be about Zen. The question might be, but your answer certainly doesn't have to have anything to do with that. Um, I just try to give people some advice, some pragmatic, practical advice that they can implement in their daily lives. My question for you is this. On the TJ's War website, you say that your favorite movie is Joe versus the Volcano. And from that film comes the quote, my father says that almost the whole world is asleep. Everybody you know, everybody you see, everybody you talk to. He says that only a few people are awake and they live in a state of constant, total amazement. So, do you live in a constant state of amazement? And if so, how do you recommend folks who aren't there yet? How do you recommend they awaken and find that sense of constant awe as well?
I kind of do. I kind of
I
do.
believe you do. I actually believe you do. Yes. From what I know
Uh,
about you, I believe you do.
um, one of the things that happened in the desert was that I get up in the morning just before the sun rose when
Mm,
I was in my tent,
mm,
and there are large sections of the desert which are completely flat, just sand. But overnight, the moisture lands on there as the air cools. It can get very cold.
mm,
But as the sun hits the sand, and it hits it all in one go,
mm,
the air, the moisture rises up from the sand surface like a blanket. And you
mm,
can actually, you might not see it immediately in front of you. You can definitely see it from about 20 feet away. And from there on out, just as it rises up, it's an amazing thing.
mm,
And I thought, I wonder how many people have ever noticed that. I don't know. But
mm.
the world is full of just amazing stuff. And if you keep asking yourself, just how is that possible, or how did that happen? I just there aren't enough hours in the day to answer these questions.
Right. So it's not so much even asking or answering how it happened. It's just maybe observing that, wow, this amazing thing
There are
is.
so many amazing things. My big thing are big stones, right? I've been out to Peru. I've been out to Sacsayhuaman, which is 13,000 foot of a mountain. There's a wall. There's two walls there built of blocks of stones. Some of them weigh over 100 tons, and it's been there at least 600 years because the Spanish found it when they first arrived. But there was no way that the indigenous people of that time built it because they didn't have the tools or the
Mm,
architecture or anything else. So it's been
yeah.
there for a long, long time.
Yeah.
You can't fit a piece of paper sideways between these stones, and they're enormous
Yeah.
and so beautifully put together. So that's Peru. Have you been to the pyramids in Egypt?
No, it's on the bucket list, but no.
Oh my God. You've got to go.
I know.
They've got blocks of granite that can weigh up to 100 tons, and they're creating the ceiling of the king's chamber, which is about 100 feet above the ground. How the hell did they do that 5,000 years ago?
Yeah. Uh, yeah, I actually had a planned trip to Egypt in '98, and I mean, right before I was about to go, there was this like these tourists were gunned down. It was like there was
Oh yeah,
this, yeah, and so I changed my plans and right at the last second. But anyway, I got to make it. What are you working on now? How can people buy the book? Where can they find you? I know LinkedIn is probably your primary or only social media thing, right?
no, yeah, pretty much. The website has a email link, and most of those emails get back to me. I do have a marketing team, a marketing person
Hmm.
called Quinn, who's doing a super job, and so he passes all these emails back to me, and I'm more than happy to talk to anybody and answer their questions,
Okay.
or just have a chat. I
Yeah.
don't know all the answers. I hope I've made that clear throughout this interview. I've only
No,
got questions.
right. Even the officers don't have all the answers, even though they pretend they do. But all right. Well, I will link all that stuff in the show notes.
But sorry, just to answer that final question because I think it's
Yeah.
important. You
Yeah.
can TJ's War is available from Amazon. Mainly, it's
Okay.
available from Amazon right across the world. But it's important when you're searching for it to stick in it's TJ apostrophe S. And a lot
Okay.
of people put in TJS thinking they're going to find it, and they won't. I'm
Right.
sorry about that. But it's TJ apostrophe S and then
Okay.
War. You'll
Or
get
if
it.
they, yeah, I think if you put in TJ's War without the apostrophe and put your name in with it, it'll come up. But regardless, I will also link the Amazon link in the show notes. So if they've listened to this, wherever they're listening to it, they can just go click and go buy the book right away. And I'll put tjswar.com, your blog, and more info about the book, pictures, some great pictures too on that site in the show notes as well. Well, that will do it, folks. Go get TJ's War by Ian McLean. Go do that first. It's a hell of a good read and inspiring. Then after you do that, if you have a few bucks left over, you can help out Zen Sammich. If you want to cut out the middleman, you can go donate directly through PayPal. All you need is the show's email to do that. That's zensammich@gmail.com. Any amount's appreciated, keeps the show going ad-free. Or you can become a continual supporter at patreon.com/Zen Sammich. Both of those options will be in the show notes as well. Ian, you're a fascinating chap. I appreciate your stories, your insight, and your time today.
You're very welcome, Mark. I'd like to have heard more about you.
Go listen to Zen Sammich. There's plenty about me.
Yeah. All I hear about you is you asking questions. I want to hear more. Who is Mark?
That's another episode for another time.
Somebody needs to interview you.
Thanks, Ian.
All right. You take care. Nice to talk to you.